After you've entered invoices into your accounts payable for all of your vendors, at some point you'll need to pay those invoices. In order to pay those invoices, you'll need to go through 3 steps. You'll want to first print and open payables report. Next, you'll need to mark the invoices that you'd like to pay. And then last, you'll need to either print checks or post your EFT or credit card payments. We're going to go ahead and show you how to print checks and post payments. So at this point, you've already marked the invoices that you want to pay. Now we just need to actually pay them. So we'll start out with printing checks. So any vendors that you've marked to be paid that you need to print a check for, you'll need to come to AP, Checks Payments, and then Print Checks. But let me take a step back. Before we do any of this, before we print any checks or post any credit card or EFT payments, you may want to do step, say, 3A and do the Preview Checks Payments report. Now, it's not necessary to do this, but what this will allow you to do is see what you've marked to be paid and for what payment type so that you can make sure everything that you've marked is correct. Sort of gives you a last look before you make the payments. So you can see it divides the report up by the different payment types, and then within each payment type it'll divide it up by each vendor, and it'll list us all of the invoices that we're going to pay and the amounts that we're going to pay. And once you've verified that everything is correct, then you can go in and make your payments. So now we'll go ahead and go back again under AP, Checks Payments, and now we'll go to the Print Checks. And we should just have the one check to print, which it does show there, the one check to print. And it shows us that the beginning check number is going to be the check number is going to be 5274. If we need to pick a different bank account to print the check from, we can do that by just clicking on the down arrow. And if we need the checks to print to a different printer, we can change the printer that it's going to. And then we want to select the check date if it's something other than today's date. Once we're ready to print the checks, we can choose either the print button, or if I had more than one check to print, I could click on the all button and print all of them. Now, a little tip here, I would normally just hit the print button on the first check if you're printing multiple checks. Just make sure that the printer's working properly, everything prints okay, nothing has gotten changed. And as long as that first check prints out okay, then you could pick the all button and print the rest of the checks. Another couple things to be careful of. The check that it's going to print is the next highest number, 5274. However, I know sometimes customers will have people in the office where maybe they take some of the checks to write manually, so they just grab some off of the stack, and those numbers may have been higher numbers than the ones that you're needing to print, and so there's a gap in the checks. And so here, obviously, you would want to change the check number. So let's say that the next check in the stack was actually 5250. If I change that check number, since I'm only printing one check, the program can check and see if that number's been used in the program already or not. And if it hasn't, it can go ahead and print the check. However, if I'm trying to print multiple checks, it can only check that first check number. So because it can't check past that, it doesn't allow you to print any checks at all, because it doesn't want to possibly overwrite a number that was already printed. So if you have a situation in which you are going to need to use a lower check number on multiple checks, and these are vendor checks, you're going to need to go in and just mark one vendor at a time in step 2, then come in, print the check for that vendor. Then you can go mark the next vendor to be paid, print their check, and so on until you get through all the checks. So you want to try and really be careful to not use checks from higher numbers and get things out of sequence. Otherwise, it can make things a little more difficult when trying to print checks. Also, something to note, when you do print vendor checks, it's going to print all of the invoice numbers on the stub of the check, and it can only fit about 30 invoice numbers on the stub. So if you are printing a check to a vendor and you've paid more than 30 invoices, what it's going to do is it's going to print that first check, then void it, go to the second check, print the rest of the invoice numbers, and then print the total of the check. So it'll end up voiding one check. If you have more than, say, 60 invoices, then obviously it would void two checks. So if you want to get around that, if a particular vendor you make lots of purchases from, your auto glass vendors during the month, and you want to prevent that from happening where it's voiding several checks, make sure in your vendor file setup, when you've set up that vendor, there's a section where it'll have a drop down for remittance, or I'm sorry, it will say separate remittance, yes or no, and you want to, on that vendor, choose yes, so that on the stub it just says see separate remittance, and then on blank paper it'll print out all of the invoice numbers. Lastly, if something goes wrong when you print the check and you use the reprint button, it's going to void that check number that it thinks that it just printed and then go to the next check number. So if when you tried to print the check it didn't end up printing the check at all, just keep in mind if you hit reprint, it's not going to use that same number. It's going to move to the next number. So you'll need to take that check number out of the sequence before you start printing again. All right, we'll go ahead and move on now. So after you've printed checks, now we had some payments that we had made by credit card and by EFT. So let's take a look at those. Again, under AP, checks, payments, let's go to the post credit card payments. Now this is an area, again, where sometimes customers get a little confused. They've gone in and they've marked the invoices to be paid and it's marked as a credit card or an EFT. And so they assume that at that point they're done. But we do need to post those payments. Marking them just indicates to the program that you're going to pay them. Posting them actually indicates to the program you have paid them. So we need to post our credit card and EFT payments by coming into this section. So here we would choose which credit card that we're using. So if we click on the down arrow, we would have a list of any of the credit cards we've set up in the system. And that's another thing, if you haven't set up your credit cards in your software, you'll need to make sure to do that. After you select which account, you'll choose the date that the credit card needs to be posted on. And that's showing us here that we've got one credit card payment to post. And then we would just choose the post all, and then that posts the payment. Now some cautions here. If you have paid several different vendors and the posting date on those payments is different, or if you have paid several vendors and you've used several different credit cards, you're not going to want to mark everything at once. So back in step 2, you would want to first just mark the vendor that you paid with that particular credit card, or maybe you paid several vendors with one credit card and a few others with another credit card. You need to mark all of the vendors that you paid with that first credit card, come in here, post that credit card payment, then go back, mark the other vendors that you paid with the other credit card and post it. Same thing with dates. If there were certain invoices that you paid on one day and then other invoices another day, you'll need to mark the first date, post that, then go in, mark the other date, post that. All right, the last thing we're going to look at is posting the EFT payments, and these would of course be payments that were drawn directly out of your bank account by the vendor. Same as the credit card. If you have multiple bank accounts and you need to pick a different bank account that the payment came out of, you can change that by using the account drop down. You would use the date that the EFT was posted to your account, and then it will show you how many payments will be posted. So again, same thing here. If you've got different bank accounts that different EFTs came out of, or different EFTs were posted on different dates, you'll need to mark those, post them, go back, mark the rest, post those. And that is the end of the process in paying AP vendor invoices. If you need to make payments to vendors where you haven't created an AP invoice, then you'll need to do that through the miscellaneous check section. So you'll want to check out the tutorial on how to do that process.